Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. It's story time, children. Gather around your computer or your smart TV or your mobile device, whatever it is you happen to be watching this video on, and listen to a cautionary tale about how a very nice lady in England got ripped off. Part of the Easy Linux project is me offering to help people get Linux installed on their computer and get a system up and running that will allow them to learn Linux and discover what it's all about. I figured out a long time ago that the hardest part of getting started with Linux was installing it, especially for a novice user. Now, many of you in the Linux community are totally, completely, absolutely out of touch with what a novice user is. I posted a video quite some time back called the Dual Boot Deception, in which I talked about how I didn't like the fact that most installers for Linux distributions offer to set up a dual boot with one click. The reason why I don't like that is because novice users can get themselves in real trouble with that and have a bad experience with Linux because then they end up with a machine that's not working properly. I'm not talking about users who understand how to manage a dual boot. They know what a hard drive is. They know where to install Linux on their hard drive. They understand what a bootloader is. They understand that Linux and Windows keep time differently. Linux uses UTC on the hardware clock on the machine, while Windows uses local time. And you have to tweak one or the other if you set up a dual boot and the Linux installer doesn't know that there is Windows on the machine when it does that. So if you are a person who understands all of that and you are willing to accept the risks of running a dual boot because you know you can fix any problem that may arise, great. For an absolute novice user who doesn't understand any of that, it can be a dangerous situation. So therefore, I always recommend that if you can do it, if you're a novice user, you need to have a separate machine to run Linux. Don't dump your Windows machine. Just get a second machine, a used machine, and play with it there. And if you decide that Linux is going to work for you and you don't need Windows, then you can get rid of the Windows machine or reinstall Linux on that one. There you go. So, I worked with a lady who is from Norfolk, England, yesterday. And actually, I have been working with her on and off all week. And she had two computers. One of them was a nice HP laptop, and the other one was a desktop computer that she had just bought. And the computer had come with Windows 10 installed. She did not want Windows 10. She wanted to put Linux on that computer. Fine. So when I started working with this lady, I found out pretty quick that she really didn't understand anything about computers. She didn't know what was in a computer. She didn't know what any of it meant. But she did know that she wanted to learn Linux, and she knew that she wanted to start moving away from the Windows experience. So as I worked with this lady, I asked her several questions to find out what kind of computer she had. And it turns out that what she had done, she went down to a local computer shop and she bought a computer. This was not a branded computer. Somebody had built this computer and they were selling them. I don't have any problem with that at all. But as I worked with her, I found out that she hadn't exactly been told the truth about what was in the computer that she had paid a great deal of money for. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the first thing that I want to talk about was she got on Amazon.com and she bought a Linux Mint USB stick. And these are all over Amazon. And this particular one that they're selling here is selling for $34.95 US dollars. That's a lot of money for a USB stick loaded with Linux Mint, folks. Because in order to put Linux Mint or any installer on a USB stick, you need a USB stick that's only about 4 gigabytes. So they're cheap as dirt anyway. So this person is obviously making a lot of money off of these USB sticks. She is not the first person that I have worked with that has bought one of these. And of the 3 or 4 people that I have worked with, one of two things has happened. Either the stick doesn't boot, or it says it's a 64-bit version, and what's actually on the stick is a 32-bit version. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that sells a USB stick with Linux Mint on it is selling something that won't work. Okay? Some of these probably work just fine, and they are what they are advertised to be. But some of them are not. And in the cases where people that I have worked with bought these things, they didn't work for them, or there was some reason that it wouldn't work. So what I ended up having to get them to do was to actually either burn a DVD or create a USB stick from a downloaded image. And that way I knew that that image would work. In the case of this nice lady that I worked with, her computer had come shipped with a gigabyte motherboard that for one reason or another would not boot USB anything. So the machine she bought did come with a DVD drive in it. So I was able to step her through the process of downloading an image and burning it to a DVD. So we were able to get the machine to boot. Before we got it to boot, I had to go in there and step her through the process of turning off secure boot so that it would boot another operating system, because this machine came loaded with Windows 10. And this was really fun because, like I said, this was an off-brand. It was just in a generic case. There was no model number. It wasn't something like that. Somebody had put this machine together, so I didn't know what was in it. So I was able to determine what kind of motherboard it was by asking her what she saw on the screen when it booted up. And so I was able to step her through the process of turning off secure boot so we could actually get Linux Mint booted. So most of the time that I spent working with this lady, I was actually just trying to get the machine to boot. Turned out the machine had a gigabyte motherboard in it, which is not terrible. And it had like really basic AMD stuff in it. It had an AMD GPU, and it had AMD graphics in it, which ended up not working on Linux Mint 18 because the AMD drivers are screwed in Ubuntu 16.04, which Linux Mint 18 is based on. So what we ended up doing was actually going and getting Linux Mint 17.3 to install on the machine, because she was insistent she wanted Linux Mint, and the only one that would work was 17.3. So I didn't try any other distros. Fine, so we get the machine to boot. Now I can actually find out what's inside this computer, because I have something on the screen that we can step through, okay? Now, she had paid £400 for this machine, which works out to be about $530 US, which is not a terrible price to pay for a new computer. However, this machine came to her with 4 gigabytes of memory installed. It is 2016, and to buy a desktop computer with anything less than 8 gigabytes of memory in it is just that's a ripoff at this point. And the part of it that bothered me was the fact that she had been told by the person who sold her this machine that he had, quote unquote, put really good stuff in it so it would last a while. The GPU in this machine sucked a gigabyte of memory off the top, because that is the way integrated GPUs usually work. They don't have dedicated memory. They steal some from the system, and that's what they use. And of course, since that's system memory and not that super fast GPU memory, tends to slow things down a little bit. So the actual system itself, the operating system, had about 3 gigabytes of memory to work with. And this machine was loaded with Windows 10. And on Windows 10, it was painfully slow. Painfully slow. So when I loaded Linux Mint on it, of course, it went a lot faster. And I told her, I said, well, the machine only has 3 gigabytes of memory available to it. So you don't have all the memory in the world. But for what she wants to do with the computer, she should be all right. Because she told me, she says, hey, I just want to watch some YouTube videos. I just want to do some email, write some documents, that sort of thing. I said, okay. I said, well, if you ever get to a point where you want to do like gaming or video editing, you probably are going to have to load more memory into this machine because it's not going to do it. So we got her going there. So she had paid for one of those USB sticks, which didn't work. Then she went down to a shop and she paid for a computer that I wouldn't have paid the price for what was in it. It just simply because I know that you can get a better machine for that same amount of money if you know what you're looking for. So if you don't want to end up in that situation, if you're going to buy hardware, make sure that you kind of know what's in a computer. So I have this website up here, and I'm going to share this in the description to this video because it basically steps you through what's in there. And it's 2016. Really, honestly, you should be getting a machine that has at least 4 gigabytes of memory in it, and it would be preferred to have 8 or more for modern operating systems, especially if you are going to be doing games or anything like that with the system. The more memory, the better, of course. Now, a lot of laptops get sold with 4 gigabytes of memory these days. I understand that, but this was a desktop computer, and the guy had said, okay, well, I'm giving you the really good stuff. And it was pretty obvious that the motherboard designer, since the GPU took an entire gig of memory, was expecting this machine to be shipped with at least 8 gigabytes of memory, because then that would leave the operating system 7 gigabytes to work with, which is plenty for what most people do with a computer. So that was something that jumped right out at me. And so anyway, we did end up getting Linux Mint installed and got her totally through the process of installation and tweaking it, got her some software installed, and she was very tickled because the machine ran really, really, really fast. It was like a huge difference going from Windows 10 to going to Linux Mint, because Linux Mint is way more efficient on memory than Windows 10 is. Most Linux distributions are. And so therefore she was pleased with that. And we were also able to get it working with her Brother printer with no problem whatsoever. To get the Brother printer working in Linux Mint, I told her, I asked her, I said, is it plugged in? She said yes. She pushed the button on the printer to fire it up. Linux Mint found the printer and configured it automatically. Wonderful. So she is a very happy person. But I kind of feel bad for her because I feel like she got a little bit ripped off. And this happens all the time because she went out and she bought a computer with Windows 10 on it. So not only did she pay for the computer, assuming that the person who is selling the computers is doing it the way they're supposed to, and actually has a licensed copy of Windows 10. I never even looked into any of that. I have no idea whether he's distributing them with OEM Windows 10 on it or not. But still, it was quite an experience working with this lady. And this repeats over and over and over again, that I work with people who have spent a lot of money on hardware, and they have spent maybe even money on people giving them bogus tech support. And then they come to me and I'm like, okay, well, we're just going to wipe all that out. We're going to start over with Linux. And then I hopefully set them in the right direction. And so therefore I wanted to do this video and talk about this a little bit because it happens all the time. So if you are finding this video and you haven't watched any of my other videos, I want to talk just a couple of seconds here about getting hardware to run Linux. it is getting to a place where new hardware, I mean like brand new hardware, hardware designed to run Windows, it is difficult to get Linux installed because they have the secure boot feature enabled, they have UEFI, it's all on there. And with most machines, you can get around that and make it work with Linux, but sometimes that can be a big pain in the butt. And some of the brand new hardware that are coming out in machines are not supported by the Linux kernel yet. Had one guy who just told me that he went out and just bought some super kick-ass system, and he can't get Linux to run because he can't get some of the drivers working. Well, if you're going to spend money on a computer anyway, why not buy a computer that already has Linux installed in it? There are several companies throughout the world that offer computers that they will ship to you, and as soon as you open the box and plug it in, you boot it up and you create a user account. Most of these machines ship with Ubuntu, not all, and there you have a Linux machine. Now, the advantage of doing this is that if the company has done their job right, then there will be no issues with drivers working. There will be no issues with hardware conflicts, especially when you're working with a company like System 76 here. System 76 ships computers that come pre-installed with Ubuntu. And you go to their website here and you can look at all of the products that they offer. They offer some really nice machines, great laptops here. Like a good basic laptop is the Lemur, and they have some really, really nice machines here. And when you buy them, they're pretty much guaranteed to work. Plus, you get good tech support from System 76. If you have a problem with it, you can always contact their tech support. And these people know Linux, and they know the machines they built. So if you're going to spend a bunch of money to get into the Linux world, why not do it with a machine that comes pre-installed with Linux? I am not getting any sort of compensation from System 76. I am using their website as an example because Dell also sells laptops that come preloaded with Ubuntu. They have their developer laptops, of course, which are really high-end, but they also have some moderately priced machines that come pre-installed with Ubuntu. And if you're just going to get started with Linux, and you just want to learn, it's probably a good idea not to buy the world's most kick-butt machine. And you never know, you might not like it. And if you don't like it, you don't want to be out a great deal of money. Or you may not need a machine with a bunch of power to it. What you might need is just something to do email, internet, watch YouTube videos, that sort of thing. So, yeah, it's getting to a place where it almost makes more sense to just buy a machine that has Linux installed, especially if you're going to go down to Best Buy, for instance. In America, we have Best Buy stores. You can buy a computer off the shelf. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to buy a machine that is running Windows, was built and designed to run Windows, and then take it home, and the first thing you're going to do is wipe it off and then put Linux on it, and you're not really 100% sure that that's going to work. So, Linux hardware is definitely turning into the way to go. Now, that doesn't apply to older used machines. If you buy a used machine and you only spend like maybe $150 on it, like an old laptop or something like that, and let's say that laptop comes with Windows 7, actually, chances are Linux is going to work on it just fine. You may have to install a driver for the Ethernet, or not the Ethernet, but the wireless. The Ethernet usually works right out of the box, and you may have to put some video drivers on there. But actually, anything that was built within, let's say, the last 5 years, pretty well supported on current Linux. And a lot of these machines just work right out of the box. It's pretty amazing. You just boot it up and everything's there, and it works already, especially if you're using a distro that configures the hardware automatically, like Linux Mint or Manjaro or something like that. So yeah, don't get ripped off. Think about what you're doing, and think about the money that you're laying out. Doesn't cost an arm and a leg to get into Linux. Linux itself is free and open to everybody, and you can download it for free. So be wise when it comes to your hardware that you're actually going to be trying it on. And, just be careful, gang. There's some people out there in the tech industry who are rather unscrupulous. And unfortunately, with this very nice lady that I worked with yesterday, they saw her coming. They saw her coming. She probably walked in and said, "Hey, I want a nice computer." And so this guy sold her this system. And while, it's not an exorbitant price to pay £400 for something like that, about $500, still for that kind of money and what she actually got in the computer, and the fact that she was told that what was in there was quote unquote really good stuff when it was pretty really average stuff, that kind of smacks me sideways. It's like, no, if you're going to sell a machine, then you need to be honest about it and say this is what was in it. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. I do appreciate it. Keep in mind that if you would like to get started with Linux, I would love to help you do that, just like I helped this very nice person in England yesterday. We do this by phone, or we do it by a Skype call, or we can do it by Google Hangouts if you like. So it really doesn't matter where you are in the world. Do keep in mind that I speak English, so it kind of helps if you're English speaking, and I'll work with you to get started with Linux. And if you are thinking about getting into Linux, please come to the Contact Me page. And if you have any questions about what hardware to get, I'll try and help you with that as well. If you're looking for a used computer, I'll be glad to. If maybe you found one that you think might work and it's on eBay, I'll be glad to talk with you about that, because like I said, I really hate to see people get ripped off. It bugs me no end. So with that note, I'm going to wrap up this little story time video, and we are going to move on to other things shortly here. We have a new episode of Mr. Desktop and Mr. Server that we're working on. I think you're really going to like this one. We're going to talk about how you can harden your Linux network, make it more secure. We'll talk about some security options. That's something that we're working on. I don't know exactly when that's going to come, but it's on its way. So for those of you who saw that, the one that we just did about the cloud, this one kind of follows up on that. So we're going to have a discussion about that coming up here real soon. And don't forget that you can come to EasyLinux.com. You can find out more about how the Easy Linux service works. You can also go to Easy Linux on Facebook, which you see here on the Easy Linux page. As long as you don't have an ad blocker set up to block Easy Linux, you'll see the Easy Linux Facebook page right here, or you can go to it directly on Facebook. And if you do, like that, because pretty much anything that I'm involved with that has to do with Linux, or anything that I think you guys might be interested in, I will post a link to there. And also check out freedompenguin.com for lots of really cool stories about Linux. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.